It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Aileen Murray and her presentation on rural workforce challenges.
Thanks very much, Kate, and I will share my screen with you. So today what I'd like to do is to share with you a little bit about what we've been working on in the workforce strategy. As you're very familiar, the Western Wardens Caucus, Western Ontario Wardens Caucus consists of 15 single and upper tier municipalities. And the intent of the organization is to enhance the prosperity and overall well-being of rural and small urban communities across that whole region. So at the moment, there isn't an overarching strategy to address the changing needs of business and industry. And of course, the situation is made more acute because the population growth within that 25 to 55 year age segment is not sufficient at this point to meet the job demands for the industry. Western Ontario has a tightening labor market, and it requires access to a whole bunch of training and other options and supports for attraction and retention of the labor force in a variety of sectors. So there's a need to actively attract workers to Western Ontario, and it includes proactively attracting business immigration and improving worker movement between communities. So without addressing these things, the region will continue to see a net reduction in the labor force, suboptimal business productivity, and reduced return on investment, which could inhibit business growth and sustainability in the future. So really the viability of small rural communities is threatened. So this strategy was intended to validate labor supply and demand at the municipal and regional level, and we've done a lot of number crunching there to determine what the appropriate numbers are, what our targets should be. It's all about developing an evidence-based workforce strategy and ensuring a collaborative approach, that partnership piece that Kate was referencing, and developing a skilled, resilient labor force that's poised to meet local employment demand and more effectively leverage the workforce planning efforts of community partners and the province. So how it fits in is it's looking at the workforce issues of attracting people to the region and retaining them with a focus on education, on housing, and quality of life. And through this exercise, we've engaged over 500 people throughout the region with 15 community roundtables. We've had one-on-one interviews with industry, and there's been a business survey as well. And the community input has led to a detailed action plan that we're still working on finessing the final pieces, but I'm really happy to be able to share where we are today with you. So the plan is expected to address ways to mitigate the local labor market issues through an attraction and retention strategy. We're going to have market-ready kits that are designed to support municipal efforts to attract business immigrants and other migrants to Western Ontario. There'll be a model for the development community to build rental housing and attainable housing for municipalities and economic development offices across the region. For this type of a project, we really did need to bring in some subject matter experts. I am a strategic planning consultant and have worked across the region. Economic development is my foundation for all of that work. So, and very active also in workforce development. So I bring that to the table. I was the project lead here. David Campbell is an economist and did all kinds of economic and demographic modeling and analysis for this project. He's also done work across the country on resident and immigrant attraction and strategic planning. Lisa Prime is a planner by trade, and she really focused on the attainable housing and best practices and model policy development. And Tracy John is a marketing and communications specialist. So the project itself, there were 3 steps. A background study looked at best practices, some other strategic plans that are in place across the Western Ontario region to provide that foundation of things that are already happening that we should be referencing and building upon for the Western Ontario Wardens Workforce Strategy. In phase 2, which is really the bulk of the work, there was that broad stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned, 15 community workshops, focus groups for industries. There was interviews, surveys, so very broad and comprehensive consultation. There was a deep dive into attainable housing best practices and policy development, including examples in Ontario, in the Western Ontario Wardens region, but also broader afield across Canada and even other parts of the globe. Labor market and people attraction, there's lots of great examples that we could learn from there, and they were referenced in the findings and issues report. And then how to apply a marketing and communication strategy to a broad region that has many different voices and many different situations and key messages that need to be addressed. So we're just at the strategy and implementation stage now. We have a draft attraction strategy, and we're working through with an advisory committee made up of Western Ontario stakeholders that are helping us to develop that plan. The report itself is very comprehensive. The findings and issues report it summarizes all that stakeholder engagement, all the work we did in post-secondary education. We looked at small business. We did a housing review, that population and workforce growth, very detailed analysis there. Workforce supply and demand, we projected what the forecasted supply would be based on population, but also looked at demand and looked at the gap between those to identify how many roles needed to be filled as a result of industry growth, but also as a result of retirements as the older population begins to retire. Marketing and communications I referenced already, and there's also a SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis, and summary findings. And I'm going to walk through those findings with you. In the appendix, we provided very detailed analysis at the county or community level to allow municipalities to do their own work on their own information sharing at the local level. Throughout the findings and issues strategy, or the findings and issues report, we actually looked at 5 different personas to help give a personal or a more human-centered focus to the types of people that we would be looking at retaining or attracting to the region. So the entry-level worker would have not a lot of money, but great aspirations, and be looking for opportunities for career growth, and looking for housing that is going to meet their lower budget needs, but to also recognize that they're going to be focusing on a whole bunch of other things rather than just their housing piece. So they need that to be simple to go forward. Newcomers also may have a limited budget, and they wouldn't have the same connections to integrate into a local housing market. So that's certainly an area of interest and concern. They're also looking for more connections with their fellow newcomers, people that would share the same customs and foods and languages, but also they want to be welcomed into their community. They want to have opportunities to integrate into their new community. 55 plus workers, they certainly have a lot of experience that they can bring to bear, but they need to find a workplace that's going to be flexible and recognize that they don't need to work in many cases to the same extent, and they will be looking for perhaps more flexible hours and more vacation time, and just a different way of approaching the work day or workplace in general. Families, they need a number of things. They are heavy housing users. They need room for kids to grow and move and and live. They also have some budget constraints that need to be considered. They'd like to be close to their home and their workplace so that they can manage and take care of their family responsibilities. They want to have amenities for their family members. And one of the most critical things, and one of the things that can be a real limitation for prospective workers, is having access to appropriate and affordable childcare. And finally, temporary and seasonal workers, one of the key considerations for them is housing, and housing on a shorter term basis. What that looks like is very important. Transportation can also be another concern for them. So when we look at the key findings in general, I'll just walk through some of the big, the highlight areas. Workforce development, we are expecting that total employment across the region is going to grow by 51,000 roles by 2030. So just 9 years away from now. But replacement and growth demand combined is 213, almost 214,000 roles. That takes into effect the growth of industry, but also retirement. What we learned through this project is that employer expectations, particularly on salary, but also working hours and a number of other things, they're not aligned with worker needs. And though if workers aren't having their needs met, it's going to be much more challenging for employers to fill those roles. The resident skills aren't necessarily aligned with employer needs. And of course, we all know about the shortages and the shortfalls in the trades area, but that extends to many other sectors, including healthcare, in administrative roles, agriculture are just a few of them. Post-secondary education, the programming, again, doesn't necessarily align with industry needs as far as the volume, the supply in particular sectors, but also some post-secondary institutions may not have the latest equipment that employers really want their new recruits to be using for to be ready for the roles they'll be taking on. We're hearing about greater competition for workers within a community where there's employees that are being lured away for a few dollars more an hour, but also from community to community, there's a lot of poaching that's happening. One more point under workforce development is that we're finding that there's a lot of youth that just don't have a lot of awareness of the career path. So if I start in this entry level role, what could it mean for me going forward? What are those future opportunities? And there may not be an appreciation for that. And so the longevity or the commitment to that role may not be there as well. On the supply side, as I mentioned earlier, there are insufficient numbers of youth that are expected to join the workforce to address demand. So looking at alternate sources of workforce is going to be critical to be successful. Across the Western Ontario Wardens region, we're seeing uneven population growth with some areas. I believe all areas are growing, but some areas are a little slower than others, and some are experiencing exponential growth. And again, that brings a number of challenges for the community, but targeting that growth will be really important to make sure that the folks that are coming in, they have an understanding of what the employment opportunities are in the area. There are good numbers of immigrants coming into the area. We're seeing increases there, but they're still way below the provincial averages. So there's opportunities to bring more immigrants in to fill those workforce needs. There is in the Western Ontario Wardens region a higher share of older people that are remaining in the workforce. Again, that's very good news for Western Ontario Wardens, but employers will need to consider how they're going to address those different demands that people have as they age in a workforce. There's also, we've noted, greater potential for representation of underrepresented groups in the workforce, and that could be a good source of additional workers. When we look at strategic sectors, manufacturing, the additional workforce demand is about 30,000 new jobs. In agriculture, we're looking at 10,500. And healthcare, which is often under the radar for economic developers, 28,300. So almost on par with what we're expecting in manufacturing. Under the employer recruitment idea, that theme, we heard from employers that housing was a major barrier in their recruitment initiatives, and both housing that they could afford to purchase, but also the rental stock and rental availability and the prices there. Employers are facing challenges finding the people that they need, the workers that they need, but they're not necessarily promoting or recruiting from beyond their immediate county area. And so there's an opportunity and a need to broaden their recruitment efforts. Few are doing that career planning or that career path work with their staff. As more immigration comes into this region, it will be critical for communities, but also for workplaces to really consider their support and their role in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and making their workplaces more welcoming. Temporary foreign workers and the agriculture sector were very, very familiar. Lots of employers are using those programs, but there are opportunities, and there could be industries that could benefit from temporary foreign workers. But getting through the rules and regulations, it does take a little bit of effort. It can be a complicated system to navigate through. And so there's opportunity and there's a role that Western Wardens could play in supporting that. And then just some general supports that the Western Wardens could look at in supporting targeted recruitment drives for particular sectors or particular skills, community promotion. So supporting the employer recruitment efforts with information about the communities that they would live in if they worked in that community, and further engagement for youth about even helping them to explore what the opportunities are within their local communities, within their local employers, within particular industry sectors. On the people attraction side, there are lots of activities that are happening across the regions, but it's uneven, and some are doing a lot more than others. There is a need to align, as I mentioned earlier, that people attraction effort with the employment opportunities. There's no point in spending a lot of money attracting a workforce that's not going to find the type of work that they need for the skills that they have. There is an opportunity for employers to get much more engaged in this work, and that I think will be something you'll see coming forward in the ultimate strategy. And overall, there is an opportunity to develop more specific value propositions aligned with those personas that I walked through a few moments ago for the member communities. On the post-secondary side, compared to the province, the Western Ontario Wardens region has fewer college students and university students based on the population. So there is an opportunity to increase the numbers of university and college graduates over time in this area. Both are important sectors, are important learning institutions, but in the Western Warden area, the college educated workers are particularly needed. And so that is an area that as a region should be a focus. International students, as we know, the numbers are going way up, but there's still a lot more that can be done in that area, and a lot that could be done to help those international students identify opportunities to stay and work following their graduation. And another interesting area in the post-secondary education area is that the number of mature students, so students under the age of 50, but certainly far above the typical student age, is way up, and there may be an opportunity for integrating those folks into the workforce with some different types of supports. Housing, as I mentioned, was a big area of focus, and the prices across the region are escalating. Excuse me, particularly those areas that are seeing higher population numbers. But what we've learned is that There's a diversity of housing that's needed that is not there today, and policy tools are required to provide that flexible solutions. Excuse me. Short-term rental units are a particular area of challenge for a lot of the communities. And the other housing stock issue is lack of housing that helps people that are renters, tenants now, so that they can transition to home ownership. One of the real challenges we heard during the consultation was that that communities aren't necessarily, the residents in these communities don't necessarily understand the need for these different types of housing and how closely they are aligned to workforce. And so we're seeing a lot of NIMBYism, so not in my backyard responses. And that will need to be addressed as the strategy is developed. There's more opportunities to look at ways that rent can be more affordable for seniors and students, and co-living opportunities. And finally, the development industry will need to be an important component of whatever strategies are developed in this area. They also are having challenges with finding the workers that they need, and more recently, access to materials. So there's a lot to work on in that area. In the small business area, of course, Western Warden Regions is made up of smaller firms. 96% of the firms have less than 25 employees. The challenge in that area is that those firms very often have less HR support or capacity to make changes to their recruitment and retention efforts. They don't have the supports that they need to engage beyond their traditional means of recruitment today. They need to be hiring from diverse groups, which may require different skills than those that they have today. Online recruitment and training may not be something that they've used before, and there may be an opportunity through the Western Ontario Wardens region to provide some of those supports. And finally, succession planning is a critical issue. A large share of small businesses are headed by individuals that are in that 55 plus category, who will be looking at some point to exit the workforce. And without the plans in place to fill those roles, it could be really challenging. On the rural limitations side, there are not as many housing options in a rural setting. Immigration attraction and retention faces challenges that are not there in an urban setting. The amenities that are in an rural area may be limited compared to those that people who've lived in a more urban area have expected. And there's particular areas of concern in transportation, broadband, and childcare, as I referenced. Just wrapping up, we have identified 4 key areas of strategic priorities that will be the foundation for that strategic plan. Workforce retention and attraction, looking at migrants, immigrants, entrepreneurs, all those amenities and services I just referenced. Leveraging the existing population so that they are being trained into the roles that are available in their communities, providing upskilling with existing workforces, supporting those 55 plus, getting youth engaged in career pathing, family repatriation, and underrepresented groups. And finally, in attainable housing, we're looking at that supply and range, the model policies to develop ways to support different forms and styles of housing, and getting senior government support to make all of that happen. Under employment, recruitment, and retention, as I mentioned earlier, providing more flexible workplaces, recruitment assistance, temporary foreign workers, and supports in that area. And a lot of different initiatives that could happen there, and of course, community promotional materials. So the strategy is very much in play at the moment. We've got a draft form. The vision for it is that the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus members will have the supports and the resources required to successfully address their workforce development needs. The mission will be to provide and advocate for regional workforce development resources and supports. So building workforce development capacity, and then fostering that collaboration, that partnership that Kate has been talking about between member municipalities and the other workforce stakeholders. I think I will leave it there. We've got lots happening in the next little while to bring it to fruition, but the drop dead date for all of this stuff is January, and all of this information will be available on the Western Ontario Wardens website, which is WOWC.ca. That's a whirlwind tour, and I'm happy to answer questions, or I guess we'll go on to the panel and then come back for questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Aileen. So our setup today is we're going to open it up for questions for you in the chat right now. So if anybody has any questions for Aileen, please feel free and pop them in the chat. And while you're getting those questions in there, the responses to the question we posed just before Aileen popped on, how do you think pandemic recovery is going? We had slowly, uneven, disproportionately, slowly, ×2, and gingerly. So some interesting responses there on how pandemic recovery is happening. So I guess one question, how are you seeing the pandemic recovery and the outreach that was done in the summer? How would you gauge the pandemic recovery, Aileen?
Um, I think it's evolving is, I guess, how I would describe it, because the challenges that we were facing early in the pandemic are different than the challenges that we're facing today. At one point, there were specific areas and specific skills that were very much in demand and really causing some problems. I think you could say today that it's across the board that there are shortages. And a year ago, I don't know that we would have been talking about the housing challenge the same as we are now, but there's certainly been huge movement in that area. And, it seems like month over month, we're hearing about the increased, and we're watching the increased prices of rental and purchase prices, which are just one more factor that makes it very difficult to attract people. If they can't find an affordable place to live, then they may choose to stay where they already are.
Fantastic, thanks. We have our first question in from the chat. It's from Belinda. Hi, Belinda. Great presentation, Aileen. She says, in regards to community promotion, who should be doing the promoting, such as region, county, or municipality?
So I think that there's probably a role for all of them. And actually, I would say that the employers need to be very much part of that conversation as well. I think at the regional level, the region might provide some tools and resources. One of the things we talked about, which is a very tactical thing, but I think would help, is just providing photography or video footage that shows an inclusive community. And that may be something that, when there's limited promotional budgets at the more localized level, that may help to promote a message that you want to put forward. But I do think that it's going to take a collaborative effort, and so there needs to be an agreement about who's doing what and how it all aligns up. But there's probably some important roles that can be played at the regional level, and then the localized level would be telling their particular story and engaging with the employers to forward their workforce development based on their community story and their community's value proposition.
Fantastic. So really that partnership is key, whether in recovery or promoting to spur that recovery on.
Yeah, partnership and planning, I would say. Yeah.
Fantastic, thanks. We've got another question too. Is there one major initiative that you think could positively impact housing challenges?
So yeah, one of the things I'm very excited about is the model policy development. And we're going to need to think about our housing policies in a different way. And again, they need to be implemented at the local level, understanding that there are differences across the region and different aspirations. But that's a lot of work that could be done at a regional level, developing those policy frameworks that then could be adapted at the local level. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I know getting excited about policy is kind of a funny thing, but but I do think that that's an area that really could make some significant headway for the region.
Fantastic. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the issues and findings, or findings and issues report and the appendix and the resources in there? So the resources on housing as well.
Yeah, so in the report, we've got a lot of examples of best practices of communities within the Western Ontario Wardens region and beyond, on policy frameworks, on different forms of housing, different ways that they're working with developers, different partnerships with nonprofits, et cetera, even models on transitioning from that rental into developing and building equity in a home. So all kinds of examples there that I think will really spark some great discussions and hopefully move communities forward in their efforts to provide that expanded form of housing that will be attainable for their future workforce.
Great. And what else is part of the issues and findings report? Elaborate on the other resources that are in that fantastic document.
Okay, so lots and lots. Population projections by municipality, so where the population is growing, detailed demographic and economic profiles by community. We're looking at the national and provincial housing trends, what's happening there, including pricing and form. There's a review of local labor market plans and how they align. And then some information and examples on member municipality people attraction efforts. But yeah, there's a very deep dive at the county level on all kinds of demographics about their particular community that I think the municipalities will find really fascinating and really give them a great start, a good place to start on. Here's where we are today. Here's what's projected to happen, and without any movement. And so what do we want? Is that where we want to go? How are we going to manage that change? Or is there a different direction that we want to be taking our community on? And then building on that, how do we get there?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Another comment in the chat is from Shelley Harris. She says, excellent information and exciting plans in place for our region. And knowing Shelley's background, she has one of the local immigration partnerships under her portfolio. Can we elaborate a little bit on immigration and its role in this project?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you asked the question, because immigration is critical to the success of the workforce strategy. As I said at the onset, we simply do not have the youth. We don't have the population to fill the demand for workers. Without immigration, we are not going to be successful. So what does that look like? It looks like a lot of collaborative efforts, that partnership piece, again, recognizing that there are local immigration partnerships that are across the region, but what else can be done? Are the employers, are they actively engaged in that? Are there things that we can learn? And I know there are. We've got some best practices across the region. Can they be more broadly applied, so that people that are having success in North Wellington, for example, those successful programs can be applied across the region? Becoming a more welcoming community, and it really does start with community at that part, is a very, very important component to our success in immigration. And again, being more flexible in the way that we conduct recruitment and the way that we onboard and all of those things in a workforce, it is going to be a real marker in the success of businesses and communities as we look to immigration to help us solve our workforce challenges.
Fantastic. So those local immigration partnerships are going to be key in
Yeah.
moving this workforce strategy forward.
Very much so. And what we're advocating for is just more discussion, more integration, and more mutual support.
Fantastic. Well, we can't thank you enough, Aileen, for your time today.